Hey everybody, welcome to this special time-lapse video where I'm pretty much I'm inking the final story page of my Realm Ethereal comic book series, The Dream Awakens. So this is going to be the fourth and final issue of the story arc, as I just mentioned, but it is kind of a special thing here, a special feeling for me, because I'm essentially wrapping up about, no more than that, 5 years worth of work on this series. Pretty much, I'm pretty excited, understandably, at least for myself, at least, just to kind of share the making of this comic book series. As I'm sitting here inking this page here, these are, I find myself reflecting pretty much on the path that led me here, and kind of like the artistic discoveries along the way. So this adventure, this comic book, began back in 2019 when I was actually wanting to get into digital painting. So I've always, been a comic book artist, always aspired to draw comics and then at some point work for a major publisher. But I've also had my interest in painting, that really stems from following and being interested by like the Frank Frazettas or the Boris Vallejos. So that just kind of tells you like the era from where I was influenced by what we would call fantasy art. So at the time wanting to get into digital painting, I basically had an iPad that I remember I bought, and I didn't even use it for like a year really. I just bought it. In fact, what I have now, and I've always had it, it's the only one I have, is the iPad Pro 2. So it's an older machine. But I bought it when it was brand new. So that and Procreate basically is how I would embark on what would be both kind of like a pretty cool and exciting, but also educational journey into that phase of painting, digital painting. So there was something kind of uniquely captivating about digital painting. It was kind of like I was wielding magic at my fingertips, because I've also done watercolor painting, wash, oils, acrylics, many years before I even tried to paint a comic book using oils, that's pretty psycho to think about that. But anyway, but because I was doing digital art before long, I found myself, alternating ultimately between, I used Procreate to do my drawings and paintings, but also going into Photoshop. Each of those served kind of like as a canvas for the different facets of my creativity, especially when it came to creating the Realm Ethereal. And so, this dynamic exchange between these tools opened up new horizons and helped shape the characters that now populate my Realm Ethereal universe. So, as I painted my way through over 30 character portraits, I stumbled upon a realization. I was basically creating a vibrant universe, rich with potential. Now, that's always kind of been my deal, is in doing my original artwork. I had a series way back that it was called Axe to Slayer, solely focused around a single character, and then later as Wreath Lion Warrior, which again was another single character. But each of these characters that I was painting digitally, through this Realm Ethereal kind of property I was developing, they each had a story within them. Even though I wasn't expressly writing something about them, as an artist first who works purely from like visual inspiration and mostly being driven by wanting to just draw or paint or create something that's cool, I realized that each one of these characters have a potential for these stories within them, just waiting to unfold. And so, while painting was cool, I had an epiphany that basically transformed my passion for single paintings into that desire to tell more complex narratives. And so this is where comic books come back, and comic books will always come back to me as far as wanting that to be my main avenue of doing artwork and telling stories. The sequential artwork of comics has always offered to me that perfect medium to explore all these tales and pretty much bring my Realm Ethereal world to life. So essentially, inspired by the comics I read as a kid, we're talking about the 80s. that's essentially when I discovered comics. I would have been somewhere around 10 or 12 years old around that time. I wanted my stories, the stories I'm doing here now, to kind of echo, kind of look and feel, and maybe even the spirit of the 80s and going into the 90s as well. So, because for those comics, for me, that's really when you want to talk about like when I really got into comics and really understood them. Like, it was cool in the 80s. I remember G.I. Joe and Transformers as a kid being the only other thing outside of comics that captured my attention. But, graduating 8th grade and then going into high school, that's when the Image era started in the 90s. And also, of course, all the Image comics were founded by artists and writers, primarily artists, who made their mark in Marvel, in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. So for me, that's where my imagination bounds. Talk about inspired. I've posted videos here before, the stuff I used to draw back when I was trying to break in and do things like that. But for me, that era, there was a certain magic with these creators and the comics coming out at the time that just resonate with me. And maybe that's just a little bit of my age. I mean, I totally love and respect the stuff that's coming out now to a certain degree. But for me, I want to capture that same sense of wonder that I had reading those comics from the 80s or the early 90s, but with my comic book series, with the Realm Ethereal, with a modern cosmic fantasy twist. I was right there when Batman: The Dark Knight came out, and you had all of these gritty comics, and so things for me right now, you couldn't help but be a part of that, unless there's always been the Silver Age and Golden Age of comic which you could always look back to, and those comics are always going to be there. Talk about those a little bit later, but the new stuff that was coming out in the 80s and 90s was very, very, very gritty and just darker in general. And so for me, as I started creating my comic book series, I knew that I wanted it to have more of that. I wouldn't say a brighter feel, but I guess even aesthetically from the outside, it's going to look brighter. It's not going to be so dark. It's going to have more saturated colors, even flat colors if I can do it, which I still haven't been able to do. I think I'm too afraid to do color flats. It might look as my comic as being too basic, but it's kind of where my inspiration was wanting to take me for this series. So pretty much, as I kept drawing my comic book, The Realm Ethereal, and as that universe expanded, so did my ambition. So right now, I really don't aspire to do work for anyone else at this time. It's certainly not sequential work, not even, anything in that area, just because it's so time consuming. And for the energies you put into it, I mentioned this before, I just want, absolute call all the shots in what I'm running for a comic book series. And because essentially the thrill of crafting my own stories, basically that has eclipsed everything else. I still want to do some figure paintings and maybe do a little bit here and there. The time right now is such a commodity as far as what do I do with it? So it's a precious commodity, right? So for right now, if I want to place my efforts into anything, it's going to be into my comic book series, because it is pretty demanding. So pretty much, it's in that self-owned space that I have always felt, and really even more than ever, really do cherish that unparalleled freedom and creativity. So over the years, my appreciation for the masters of comic book storytelling, from the Silver Age to the Bronze Age, and as I mentioned before, the late 80s and 90s, is pretty much has even deepened more. I can still go walk over my comic book collection here in my room, my studio, and look at some older comics that still inspire me. A lot of those are, basic comics that were printed on newsprint. And so, to me, a lot of those artists possess an exceptional ability to blend draftsmanship with narrative brilliance. I'm sure all of them were just working within the constraints of, a comic book by production line. And also for the methods at the time of having to create artwork that had to be very specifically drawn in a way that would reproduce well off of a web press, printing on newsprint, so the artwork couldn't be as detailed. You didn't have the kind of computer coloring that you do nowadays to have such an expansive palette. Things like that. So again, going back to those comic books, I really do admire the work there. It's pretty much all that stuff is a standard I hold in pretty high regard. So I aspire to their level of creativity and storytelling craft. It seems like those comics had a simplicity to them that I want to have in my work, even today, as it in 2025. So to me, that's just exciting for me personally speaking, and how I see myself making and creating my own, indie comic book creations. So, though it might feel like an elusive goal, that's pretty much pursuit filled with endless learning and inspiration, right? I mean, that's what pushes me to elevate my own craft and my own comics here. So now that I'm wrapping up this first story arc, the Dream Awakens, part of my Realm Ethereal universe, I feel a profound sense of accomplishment. So, I mean, this 4-issue introductory storyline, and there is going to be a follow-up storyline to this. This introduction storyline not only marks this personal milestone, but it also kind of encapsulates my growth as an artist. So, from I think the first issue, if you go to my website, all these pages are up to read, and you can kind of see the transformation of the art. And some of that is probably, and in fact I know a lot of it is just due to it taking me 5 years to make 4 issues, and my art has changed. And I think a lot of that's due to just the method I was using, such as I started out in Procreate, and I was able to experiment a lot. And essentially, kind of as those issues progressed, came out, I experimented with going to traditional art, pen and ink on paper, and then bouncing back to Procreate and then going to Photoshop. So you're going to see a little bit of this not so consistent look and feel, at least to my eyes. But then certainly the inspirations. I know the very, very early issues, the first issue for sure, and the second issue is really inspired because I discovered the work of Sergio Topi, and I was just so blown away by the way he drew, and so I kind of tried to draw like that style. But then as I moved into subsequent pages, but then the third issue and now the fourth issue, I'm really zoning in on being a little more clear. And I've always really admired the art style of Alan Davis, and artists like that, like Al Williamson, that have somewhat of a realistic look to a kind of still comic book style. And so that's, I'm kind of trying to minimize the amount of ink that I'm trying to put down, trying to be a little more thoughtful with every line I put down, rather than just trying to be a little more too what's the word, trying to render too much. But again, that's just, I think my temperament as an artist is kind of moving around. But I think for this moving forward, I'm definitely going to simplify things with my artwork, at least, but still trying to keep it in the vein of that type of style anyway. Kind of moving forward, it's it's a discovery of what is the most effective and efficient way to create something that to my eyes looks great and I can be happy with, but is also an efficient drawing style, right? So less ink on the paper means hopefully on the page of artwork means the artwork will move along faster. So, crafting this storyline, as I've wrapped it up, it's, as I mentioned, certain growth as an artist, realizing and learning certain things, and seeing a comic book all the way to the end, from the initial character sketches to the final inking, as we're seeing here. So each of those steps along this journey, if you want to call it, contributes to that learning and that evolution as an artist. So pretty much this 5-year tapestry that I've woven is filled with exploration and improvement, and again, that creative discovery. Creating each panel, in this case I'm drawing a splash page for the final page here, story page. It pretty much reaffirms my conviction that comic book art is where I truly want to spend my creative energies focused. That, again, I mentioned it before, it brings such a unparalleled joy and fulfillment because of the amount of work that goes into each page. And so for me, my characters are more than illustrations. They become reflections of my own hopes and ambitions. So as I continue on this journey, I'm pretty sure they'll evolve alongside me. Each iteration is a testament kind of to the boundless quest for storytelling excellence. And I think as comic book artists, we all we'll want to have our work at least try to hold it to a certain standard, hopefully a high standard. So yeah, anyway, just thanks. I made a couple of these videos as much as I can, kind of documenting this, proving that I am hand drawing all this stuff in the real world, more than pixels. Again, not to take anything away from digital art, because I still love creating digital art, and obviously the coloring is done digitally, which I do myself. But again, for me, it's just exciting to have this final page right before me, just materializing and realizing this is pretty much like, wow, I've seen this story arc through to completion. That's probably the biggest win, is just finishing it. So together we'll traverse this fantastical universe for those of you who want to keep following, and it's pretty much led by my passion and my excitement for creation in its purest form, and keeping creating. And hey, all I can say is just keep creating for creation's sake, and join me in the next chapter of this comic book cosmic narrative. Anyway, thanks for watching. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment if you're so inclined, and if you want to subscribe, that'd be even better.